Hello, everyone. I'm Tharwat Mansour. I'm a board member in the Franco-British Network. The Franco-British Network is a non-profit organization in France with the objective of helping British people resident in France or planning to move in the near future and helping them overcoming their daily challenges. Today, I'm doing a chat FBN, and it's a very important topic. I know many of our followers requested this, and the topic is about inheritance law in France. And for this, I'm having with me Mr. Christophe Dutertre. Thankfully, we're very glad to have you with us, Mr. Christophe.
Yep.
Welcome to this chat.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Christophe is a lawyer with a diploma as notaire practicing in UK. He also has a diploma in European notarial law, and he has a step certificate in international succession and probate. So he's going to give us very valuable information today about this topic. We start with the overall general question, Christophe. My next question is, can you please explain the disadvantages of a married couple buying a property on Tontine?
Tontine. Okay. So Tontine, it's something which was extremely popular in the 80s, 90s for British citizens. They will put the Tontine to buy a property, which I think is a similar concept to the joint tenancy in England. So the Tontine, two people with a difference of age that should not, to me, exceed about 15 years. Above 15 years, it could be challenged, but up to 15 years, you should be okay. Could purchase a property in France and have a Tontine. A condition, the age difference, no more than 15 to me. An equal contribution to the purchase price. I'm not necessarily asking a 50-50, but if you've got a 80-20, that's something which could be challenged. And one condition which, again, is quite important is a Tontine can only be set up if you are married under a separation of ownership, marital regime. If you are married under a community of property or French marital regime, then it's more complex, not impossible, but more complex. Before talking about the disadvantage, I think the Tontine is, when can I have a Tontine if I buy a property in France or if I already live in France? And again, if you want to buy a property in France and you're in the UK, you are likely to be under a separation of ownership regime. In that case, you can buy a property with a Tontine if you want to. If you are already in France, you need to be aware of the automatic switch of matrimonial regime that will apply in France. And a lot of clients have been caught by this automatic switch. From the 1st of September 1992 until the 29th of January 2019, France was governed by the Hague Convention regarding matrimonial regime. And that convention provides that when a person who was married between the 1st of September 1992, 29th of January 2019, when a couple moved to France and spent over 10 years in France, their regime automatically switched to the French community regime. So a lot of people were married in the 90s. They moved to France early 2000, for example, and they've been in France since. So after 10 years, they have been subject to French matrimonial regime, community of property, communauté de biens réduite aux acquis. And a few people say, oh, before we moved to France, we bought a property with a Tontine because we don't want our children to inherit. We want to do the same now. You can't. You can't, because the Tontine only apply if you are not married under a community of property. Now you are married under a community of property, you can't have a Tontine. If you have a Tontine, it's not valid, and your children will be able to claim their share. So, again, few little points to check before you can have a Tontine, and it's quite important. Could have a massive effect at the time of death. Now, the disadvantage of the Tontine. It's very difficult because Tontine is, the disadvantage to me would be the tax that could trigger with the tontine? Tax because you have children from previous marriages, you are in a good relationship, good term with them, and basically, we've got a property, we bought it on tontine, because we wanted the property to pass to each other, but then after the second death, it will be split between all our children, common or separate. Well, obviously, the property will belong to one spouse only. After the first death, the property is deemed to belong to one spouse. When that surviving spouse dies, why not? Again, under condition, you could transfer the property to all the children, common children, stepchildren. But the stepchildren, because they are not related to the surviving spouse, they will have to pay 60% of inheritance tax in France. And they will only have a tax threshold at the moment, which is 1,594 euros. So you basically pay 60% on basically the value that you inherit. Is that what you wanted? With a tontine, you are restricted to what you can do. Because if you have a tontine, whoever dies first is deemed to have never owned the property retrospectively from the purchase. So therefore, if your aim was to transfer the property to all the children after the second death, yes, maybe you can, but the stepchildren would definitely have to pay 60% of tax. So that's something quite difficult. The other disadvantage of the tontine, not necessarily after death, is during the lifetime of basically the co-owners. If you have a tontine, having a tontine means you are not in a co-ownership because we don't know who owns the property and it doesn't create a co-ownership. With a tontine, you are stuck. If, for example, you are a married couple or you are just partners, you buy a tontine and you separate. So unless you divorce and you decide how the property should be split or shared, you separate, or if you are a partner, you separate. If you want to annoy your partner, you say, no, I don't want to sell the property, and you can't force me because we've got a tontine. You're stuck. You are literally stuck. So it means what? It means you have to go to court, try to find a court order to force the sale of the property. I don't know if a judge will be able to do that, probably, but I'm not a litigator, so I would not know. But the tontine means you are really in a position where you are stuck. You can't sell the property without your co-owners, whether it's a spouse, a partner, or friends, and you bought the property with him. You are stuck. So that's quite a disadvantage for the tontine. That's probably the main disadvantage for me with the potential tax implication for the stepchildren if they were to inherit the property after the second death. That's probably the main two disadvantages of the tontine, I think.
Will money left to English charities in our will be subject to French inheritance law?
Right. So now we're talking about Brexit. One case where we're actually talking about Brexit. Before Brexit, England was part of the EU and the EEE, the Espace Économique Européen. After Brexit, they're not part of anything anymore. And therefore, if you look at the tax code, which is the Article 794, different section, a charity registered in the EU could have been exempted of inheritance tax in France. But in this scenario, if you bequeath some of your estate to a British charity registered in England, I don't think that the British charity can be exempted of inheritance tax anymore because England is not part of the EU and you can't apply that specific tax article of the tax code. If the British charity has a branch in the EU, maybe in that case, bequeath to the branch located in the EU, and they should be exempted. But I don't think that they will be exempted of inheritance tax. And that is why when some clients ask me, can I leave my assets to charities? I often say, yes, try to leave your assets to French registered charity, association reconnue d'utilité publique, for the French wording, which means they will be exempted of French inheritance tax. Otherwise, they could face the 60% tax.
Wow. Means tax to pay after death of your family, for your family.
Capital gains tax, when someone dies, you pay inheritance tax. So you don't pay capital gains tax. You will only pay capital gains tax when you resell the property that you inherited. And when you resell the property and you make a gain. Two different scenarios. I inherited the property. I don't want it. I will sell it more or less the same day that we complete probate. It will be the same value. The value for probate and the sale price, same value. No capital gains tax to pay. But if you keep your property for 5, 6, or 10 years and it increases in value, then yes, you will be subject to French capital gains tax. Obviously, if it's not your main residence, if you inherit a property and you moved into the property and make it your main residence, you shouldn't be subject to French capital gains tax.
Okay.
So capital gains tax, not after death, only if you resell basically the assets that you inherited with a gain.
Okay. And is there any way to avoid my stepdaughter being liable for 60% inheritance tax if my husband dies before me?
That's difficult. So we are probably talking about the different scenario we discussed. I want to make a will. I want to give everything to my spouse, but then after the second death, I want everything to be split between the children or just my husband, daughter, for example. That's the only child. As a spouse, I consider my stepdaughter as my daughter. I would like her to inherit, and I don't want her to pay 60% of tax. She should not pay 60% on her father's share of the estate, either because the father will transfer the estate to his daughter when he dies and provide his spouse with some protection, such as a life interest, or because you can adapt and draft your will in such way that you transfer the estate to the surviving spouse. But when the surviving spouse, whatever is left, can be transferred back to the daughter. A share of it will not be subject to the 60% tax. But if we're only talking about in this question about basically the stepmom asking how to avoid her share of the estate to be taxed at 60% when her stepdaughter inherit, no, I don't have any answer to that, except that she gives her share to her husband, trust her husband basically to own the entire estate, so at least the entire estate will be taxed the tax ratio between parents and children, and not step-parent and stepchild. Yeah, it's very difficult to answer that questions because you've got a lot of scenario where you only have one child, which is not a common child, but basically both spouses consider that child as their children or their children. And yes, it's not unusual to have a parent saying, my stepdaughter or my stepson, it's like my son, it's like my daughter. I don't want them to pay 60% of tax. It's difficult. It's difficult unless you actually remove your assets from your estate and see if you can transfer that to your husband tax-free. Then it can pass to the daughter or the son. It's quite difficult. I think it would be difficult to avoid that.
I have had a beautiful home in France for the past 25 years and own it outright. I think I should like to pass it to my 3 grown-up children, but don't know the tax implications.
Right. So a property outright, transferring it to your 3 children, 2 options. Either you want to transfer the asset or the property now, so you basically give the property to your children, or whether you just want to wait until you die. You can have a will or not, and the property will pass to the 3 children. Option one, you want to give the property to your 3 children. The person is French resident or not?
Yes, they
Yeah.
are French residents.
So French
They own the
residents,
house since 25 years.
25 years. So French resident, 25 years. Let's assume it's the only assets that they have, with French bank account, but the only asset that they have. I would recommend this parent to give the property to his children if he wants to, and if they are all in agreement and the relationship again is good. The 3 children will have a tax threshold of 300,000 euros before they pay tax. Before they pay tax on the value of the property. The value of the property, you've got 2 options for the parent. One option is I'm giving the full ownership of the property to my 3 children. If he's living there, it's really not the best option. So possible, but not the best option. Second option is I will give the property to my 3 children and I will retain a life interest, the right for me to keep using the property, and they will fully own it when I die. A lot of people do that in France, which is what we call a donation entre vifs. You give a real estate to your children, you retain your life interest, the right to use the property and keep using it as your main residence. And the advantage is that the taxable share for the children will be reduced by the value of the life interest that you keep, that you retain. As a parent, we will value the life interest. The life interest is based upon your age at the time of death or the time of gift, in that case. And it will be a percentage that will apply. To give you an example, if you are in your 50s, you deduct basically 50%. In your 60s, 40, 70, 30. So if you have 3 children, let's say an example, you've got 3 children, a property worth, let's say 500,000 euros, to give you an example. If you give the property outright to your 3 children, 500,000 euros, minus 300,000 euros, which is the tax threshold, 100,000 euros per child, total taxable, 200,000 euros, tax to pay 20%. So basically 40,000 euros to inherit the property by gift. Same value, but the surviving spouse, the parent, give the property and retain a life interest. Surviving spouse in his 60s. Value of the property, 500. 40%, we deduct 200,000 euros. Taxable share, 300,000 euros. Tax threshold, 300,000 euros. Property transfer tax-free to the children. So the advantage of retaining a life interest is you reduce the taxable share payable by the children at the time of the gift.
Okay. What are the best options for a single retired person without children, homeowner outright, lived in France for 23 years, no assets in UK? What are the best options for a single retired person without children, homeowner outright, lived in France for 23 years, no assets back in UK?
Right. So in that case, I would say the person can do whatever he or she wants with the estate. No children, no parents, no one. Free to dispose of the estate as she wants. Anyone who will inherit, if there is no family, and we are only talking about friends, for example, they will be taxed at 60% because they are not related. It's really where there is no family. The best option would be to leave your estate to French registered charities, so they are exempted of tax. Another option to consider depends the value of the property, depends the value of the estates. If you want to give your assets to a friend, the only way to maybe limit the tax exposure will be to have a life insurance policy, assurance-vie. The assurance-vie, the advantage is you can give tax-free to whoever you want, up to 152,500 euros. Then above that, I think the next threshold is 600,000 or 700,000 euros, and you pay 20% of tax. So even if you've got liquidity is worth 500,000 euros, instead of being taxed at 60%, the worst scenario, you will have a share taxed at 20%, which is less than the 60%.
Mhm.
So if you have liquidities and they just sit in your bank account, if you don't need the liquidities and you want to give that to a friend, maybe try the life insurance policy. You need a financial advisor to give you some advice on that. But under circumstances, think about the life insurance policy. Obviously, life insurance policy is something you need to consider for tax purposes before your 70th birthday. Because after your 70th birthday, anything that you put in a life insurance policy will be part of your estate above 30,500 euros. So if you're in your 60s, you don't have any family, you've got some liquidities, you've got a friend that you like and you would like to give some money to that friend, think about the life insurance policy. As far as the property is concerned, that's difficult. Selling the property to a person, they will have to pay you the purchase price. Selling the property under what we call the viager, you are in your 60s, so you are still young, likely to live for another 20 or 30 years. So it could be actually quite expensive for that person to buy you en viager. So for the property, it might be limited options. For the liquidities, there are some tools to limit the tax exposure in France. Or you give to a charity.
Mm-hmm. Clear enough.
Probably.
So thank you so much, Christophe, for being with us
You're
today.
welcome.
So stay tuned. Thank you so much. And to another chat FBN session.